I want to thank the Institute first for inviting me. This is the first time that I have ever been to Jackson. And I was sharing with someone earlier that Paula Jackson, my husband, is from Jackson, Mississippi. And I've never been here before. So I'm really, really very, very pleased to be here and really love the topic of workforce development. Perfect segue, I think, in terms of what the history of this association is. So you've heard a little bit about what we do, but let me just share with you a little bit about our history and why workforce is so passionate an issue for us as an organization and for me personally. We are a 39-year-old professional association, and we were founded 7 months after Jimmy Carter took office in 1977. And so looking at the demographics of the people in this room, myself included, not to insult anybody, but I would think that most of us kind of remember what was going on in the energy industry in 1977, right? We're coming out of an oil embargo. We have a new president. We're trying to figure out how is this country going to be less dependent on foreign oil. It started the creation of the Department of Energy and a lot of what we see now in a regulatory structure in this business. When President Carter took office, he brought together those who he believed were kind of the leaders and the key thinkers around energy policy in the U.S. to think about what it is that the country needs to do to respond and move forward. A couple of interesting things about that group. No one in that group of people that he brought together were of color. None of them worked in the energy industry. So imagine now that you're deciding how we're going to move forward in energy with people who don't work in energy and with people who do not represent the makeup of this country. And so our organization was founded really to address that, right? How do you make sure that all communities who absolutely use this resource, who need it to survive, are also fully participating? And we start as an association with policy, but a big piece of it is how do we make sure that we are represented in this industry as employees, as leaders, as suppliers, in every kind of facet. And it's an industry that truly does drive the economy. To the point of an earlier speaker, you don't have a sense necessarily of how important energy is until you don't have it. When I speak to young people and I tell them about the importance of energy in this industry and they roll their eyes and they're like, oh, you know, it's not that interesting and blah, blah, blah. But when there's a storm and they plug in their little cell phones and those things don't charge anymore, all of a sudden everybody's really interested. And anybody who has teenagers at home know how interested they are when they can't use their gadgets. Because I'm a mother of 4 and I will tell you they make your lives completely miserable because all of a sudden we don't know how to talk or do anything else without the phone or the TV or the iPad or whatever. And so this idea of workforce and making sure that all people are a part of that is a big deal for us as an association. Here's something also that I thought about yesterday as I was preparing to talk with you, and I thought, wow, so you think about the history of this association. We are on the back end of Martin Luther King's weekend. And we are in Mississippi talking about how do you get more minorities in this business. And I would suggest to you that 50 years ago, no one would have ever imagined that we'd be having this conversation in this audience with this diverse a group of people who have an interest in making sure that we're all a part of it. And so, one, you should all be commended for that, because we all do that. That's a big deal. But the other thing, and the part of what makes my job so wonderful is that when I started my career and you started talking about diversity, it was kind of, it's the right thing to do. It's altruistic, we want to do the right thing. And then we moved to, you want to have a diverse workforce because you want your workforce to reflect your customer base, right? And now we're in a situation, quite frankly, and Mississippi is ahead of most of the country, where if you do not have a diverse workforce, I'm not quite sure how your business is going to operate, okay? Because the truth is that young people, 18 to 24 and below, are diverse. They are. And they are far better prepared to deal and work in a diverse environment. And we as parents did that. So I always kid My husband, when we talk about the decisions that my kids make and the choices that they make, and I say to him, but this is our fault, right? Because we raised them in an environment where we said, A, you can be anything that you want to be as long as you're willing to work for it, right? B, you judge people not by what they look like, but by who they are, whether or not you have something in common with them, all those other things, right? C, you should be good to people and think about what your passions are. Find what you love to do, and then you find someone to pay you to do it. These are the things that we tell our kids. None of us ever thought they really would believe us, right? Because that's not how we walk through life. But that's how they walk through life. And if you have kids who are, or employees who are millennials and not Gen Z is hopefully not, that child labor, but certainly millennials, you see that kind of thinking and how they bring that to the workplace. So I am a Gen Xer. And the interesting thing about Gen Xers is, and anyone here who's Gen X, born between 65 and 1980, I can't be the only person, right? So as a Gen Xer, I can recall early in my career being around baby boomers who lamented about the fact that we were lazy. We didn't want to pay our dues. We didn't particularly understand that you have a very long career span, and so you can't get the next thing. You get a good job, you stay in that company 10, 15, 20, 30 years, and all these great things will happen in that span of time. And Gen Xers come in, and they're not really interested in this 20-year span of waiting until that opportunity comes, whatever that great opportunity is. But here's the thing that we didn't think about, and our boomers and my friends who are boomers never thought about. Gen Xers went to college in an environment where you were told you don't stay in any place more than 5 years. True? 5 years. And so the average span of a job for a Gen Xer is 5 years. The average span for a baby boomer, 7 years, average tenure. What do you think the average tenure is of a millennial in a job? It's 2 years. It's 2 years. And so as an industry where people, one, have very long career spans, 25, 30, 35 years, if you think you're going to hire someone at 25 and they're going to hang with you for 30 years for that next great opportunity, not going to happen. Not going to happen. And so we have to challenge ourselves to think about how do we bring them in and then move them enough so that they are encouraged and excited about the work that they're doing, right? So it's not that they're necessarily going to leave your organization. It doesn't mean that they need to hop around, but it does mean that we need to figure out how do you impassion them so that they want to stay and keep and grow with your organization, right? That's how millennials think about it. Another interesting thing about millennials, and so while we talk about diversity in terms of race, I'm moving to age because quite frankly, they're one and the same. 47% of millennials are of color. They're African American and Hispanic, 47%. And so we're talking about the same kind of group of people. But the other thing that's very interesting about them is that millennials don't work for you, they work with you. They don't have bosses, they have colleagues. And so while you may be my boss in kind of the chain of command, I believe as a millennial, if I'm a millennial, that I am working with you and we are working together. It is not the same as you're just going to do what I say and keep it moving, right? Because that's kind of how I came into the workforce, right? Your boss tells you what to do and then you do it because that's just how it works. And a lot of Gen Xers were very resistant of that. I will tell you, I'm one of those. I wasn't a good listener in the beginning. But Gen Xers, and this is how we're different than millennials, will assimilate into the culture of the organization that they belong to. And millennials will leave. Millennials are not going to assimilate and kind of get with the program like a Gen Xer will. And so as people who are employers, you got to think about that when you're bringing them in. They are not afraid to go do something else. They are not afraid to start their own thing. They just don't have the same sense of it. When you look at Gen Zers, right, and I have 2 of those in my house, they also are even far more aggressive, right? They are thinking about entrepreneurship in elementary school. They're not coming in thinking about at 10 and 11, 12, 13 years old, what I want to work for Google. They're thinking, I'm going to build my own Google. That's how they think about it. And even with those challenges, I would suggest to you that we have a huge opportunity to bring them down, bring them in. Because at the end of the day, this industry is incredibly innovative. We don't tell people that we're innovative. We think of it as a bit mundane. But if you thought about the process of burning coal or natural gas and what had to happen from the time you pulled that resource to get those lights to come on, that's a whole heck of a lot of innovation that occurred, right? I mean, there's no, and I couldn't explain to you how it works, but I clearly understand that there were a lot of brains and a lot of innovation to get from one place to the next place. And so I think in the messaging for these young people, those are the kinds of things that we talk about. Let me ask you a question. What is a good job? Anybody? Is it a well-paying job? If someone said to you, I got a good job, does that mean that you're getting a good pay? Raise your hand if that's what a good job is. Well-paying job. Benefits. Security. Retirement. I mean, let's be honest. When would you not agree that that's a good job? I would suggest that if you talk to a lot of young people and you ask them what a good job is, that's not a good job. That's a gig. And there's a difference, right? That a gig is what I do because I just need some money. I'm not necessarily committed to it. I kind of have an interest maybe, but I gotta, you know, if it's McDonald's or if it's a light company, it's the same because it's not really what I want to do. A good job to a young person is something that they're passionate about. That's a good job. What we're finding in even some of the polling that we've done with API and others is that money has absolutely nothing to do with it when you ask young people about where they want to work. Money's like number 4 on the list. Now that's our fault too, right? Because we've raised a bunch of kids who don't care about how much money they make. That, I'll tell you, is a problem for me because I always look at my children, I'm looking at the little one now saying, you're the one I'm going to count on. Because these other 3 I'm not too clear on. No one cares about money. But part of that is that they have this focus on doing good. Energy companies do good. Energy companies do tremendous work. They have a focus on travel. They have a global view. And these are all things that we do in our business every single day, but we don't talk about it in that way to excite kids about the work that we do. The other thing, though, I think, and we talked a little bit, another speaker talked a little bit about educational attainment and the fact that now these careers are more skilled labor, semi-skilled labor versus college. And I think as an industry, we need to think about, particularly with the changing dynamic, some of the cultural things that go on when you start to talk with students of color about maybe not going to college and going into skilled labor, right? What I've heard across in various forms across the country is that we've done a really good job in this country of making skilled labor seem like not good jobs, right? If you want to have a great career, you go to college. If you go to college, you're going to make $1 million more over your lifetime than if you don't go to college. These are the things that we've been telling people for generations. And now here we come and say, hey, don't worry about college. Why don't you go ahead and be a welder and you can make 6 figures, you can do X, Y, Z. And all that is very true, but it is counterintuitive to what we have been saying for the last 25 years. That's the first thing. But the second thing we have to recognize is that culturally, first, particularly for people who are African American descent, this idea of kids not going to college, when our parents didn't go to college and struggled, or our grandparents didn't go to college and struggled and did all these things just so their kid could go to college, I can't come now and tell that child, don't bother going to college. I'll give you an example. I have a son who's 18 years old who started at Widener University this fall. And last year, very bright young man, lazy, naturally smart kid. You know how you have kids who's just really, really smart with no effort? My son, very smart, no effort. So I really don't know how he's going to do in school because now he's actually got to study and do some work. But he went to an IB school, you know, one of the top schools in the country and all this other stuff. And then he says to me one day when he comes home, I'm not sure that I'm going to go to school. And I'm thinking, what are you talking about? Because you are absolutely going to college, because I certainly didn't do all of this running around so that you can tell me you're not going to school. This is not even a conversation I'm wishing to entertain. And initially I thought we were back to when he was about 13, he would say to me, I just want to be a cop, because then I don't have to go to college. And I said, oh, you haven't heard that, you know, police officers have to go to school now. You don't just go to the police academy at 17 and they hand you a badge and send you on your way. And so he gave up that idea. But he comes now and he says, I'm thinking that I want to be a welder. I'm the CEO of the American Association of Blacks in Energy. I know how great it would be for my child to be a welder. I know what a great career he could have being a welder. I know that he could be in the middle class. I know this. And yet when my child told me that he wanted to be a welder, I would be lying if I didn't tell you that I thought more than once about what I was going to say to him about that. Because that was not what I was raising him to do. And that is the truth of the situation, right? And so we can always talk about these great jobs, because they are, but we need to understand who it is that we are talking to and what is it that they're thinking about as you're talking to them, right? So it's not to say don't share it, but you gotta kind of meet people where they are and understand where they're coming in. Now I have another son who went to community college, struggled with the decision about community college. He's got a twin sister, she's going off to school, and my child, my son Aaron, he's a walker, right? He's always kind of back and forth like this when he's stressed out or he's anxious. And he's 6'5", and his room is above mine, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, all I'm hearing is pacing, back and forth, for months. And I finally say to him, do you want to go to this school? Do you want to go? And he's like, well, I know I'm supposed to go, and I know that, you know, we're supposed to. And I said, I get that. Do you really want to go? Do you want to leave home? No, I don't want to leave home. I would rather go to MC down the street. And I said, okay. And it was the last day he paced. And he graduated, and now he's off at UMBC. But what that experience taught me is that there is another path, right? In community college, and when you're talking about students of color, and particularly of African American students, community college isn't junior college, right? And so those of us who look like me kind of understand, you know, you having to say, well, junior college isn't really college, community college isn't really college. If you're not going to a four-year university, then you're not really going to school. That's kind of like the 13th grade type of thing, right? Because that's how people sometimes think about community college, and that's completely not true. And we have to understand that, right, and give it words so that we can now dispel that crazy myth. Because community college is actually a tremendous way, one, for people to prepare for a career. It's great for students who aren't really sure if they want to continue in college, right? You've got smaller class sizes, you've got teachers who are far more interested in what you're going to do next. But we have to understand where people are coming from before you suggest it, right? Because otherwise it falls on deaf ears. And then you have those students who just aren't interested in going to school. And so I think it's always very interesting. I used to do a lot of work in economic development, and it always was very interesting to me how much we pushed and pushed and pushed about students going to four-year institutions and never acknowledged that only 25% of those students actually go and finish. And we never talk about what the other 75% are supposed to be doing. At the same time, we're removing trade schools from our public education system. Sounds a little nuts, right? If you know that only 25% are actually going to go to college anyway, shouldn't we be thinking about what the other 75% are going to do? And how do we support them so that they can do the things that they love and enjoy? And so I think we as an industry have this tremendous opportunity, because we can actually make the tie between what you learn in trigonometry class to what your work is. And I use trigonometry as a specific example because it was something that I learned. I started my career at a gas company. And as I started, I went out with the gentlemen, the street guys, to watch how this whole process worked and what they were doing. And there were all these older gentlemen who were very gruff and always used to say, you college kids think you're so smart. You college things think you, I know you think you're such, so. But they were the most wonderful people I met. And there was a gentleman who was the welder. And so we had dug the hole for this pipe. This is when you had paper cards for maps. There was no kind of electronic mapping. You had the little card and you pulled out a thing. And what they realized is that the map was wrong in terms of where the pipe was and how they were going to have to make this cut. And so the field tech, who is a college engineer, electrical engineer, mechanical engineer, runs back so he can do this calculation. He's got to go to the office and go on the computer and all this other stuff. And the welder has a little piece of paper and he writes out a formula. And he hands me the paper, and he says, Paula, let me tell you something. You college kids think you're so smart. Now you see he ran all the way back to get on that computer to figure out this thing, and this paper, this is the number he's gonna come back with. And now we sit and wait, have a cup of coffee, hang out, because we gotta go back to the office, and we're in the street, so we're just enjoying this beautiful day. And by the time my colleague gets back, and he says, here's the calculation, and I open up the paper, and it is the same exact number. And I'm saying this guy, because he's now been in the company 40 years. I said, how did you do that? And he said, basic trigonometry. And I said to him, that's what you do with trigonometry? And he goes, yeah. Didn't you know that? And I said, I had no idea what you do with trigonometry. But I use it as an example to say, oftentimes you have students who are sitting in classrooms learning things halfway and not paying attention because they really don't know what its use is for. And I can't imagine the things that I would have been able to do had I been paying attention, had I known that that's what you use, that's one way you use trigonometry. And so this is, again, is an industry where that opportunity exists to connect those kinds of dots. Okay, so, but it's not without its challenges. Trying to meet audiences of color, young people can be very difficult because, one, their attention spans are not as long as we might like, right? My 8-year-old can watch the television, use the computer, and mess with my iPad all at the same time. And if I ask him a question, the first time he'll act like he doesn't hear me, and the minute I say latent, if you do not respond, that goes away for 3 weeks. He has the full repertoire of answers that I was looking for. So he's clearly paying attention. And what we know about Gen Zers is that their attention span ranges about 8 seconds. 8 seconds. So if we're deciding that we want to tell them about an opportunity, it's going to take us 20 minutes, you're kind of out of luck because he stopped 19 minutes and 50 seconds ago. But they're also incredibly good with technology, right? Little ones especially have grown up with this technology. They don't know a world without technology. I don't know if anyone has ever had experience of a child asking you, how did you listen to music before the CD? What did you do before MP? How did you listen to music? And I was like, records. What's a record? I'm like, thank you for making me feel just ancient. And so we have to figure out how do we reach them using technology. How many people in this room use Facebook? Yeah, we all use Facebook. How many people in this room have 15-year-olds who use Facebook? Yeah, therein lies the issue, right? My 30-year-old daughter said to me when we got on Facebook, her dad and I got on Facebook, she said, yeah, now we're done with it. Because now Facebook has become the old people's social media. How many people in this room use Snapchat? You're in academia, are you? Yeah. People around, anybody here know who does everyone here know what Snapchat is? Okay. So you have to be about 15, 14, 16, 17, that age range. That's how they communicate, right? Snapchat. When my son stepped foot on the college campus, when the seniors and upperclassmen are welcoming him and trying to get him to join the club, they say, man, they hand him a business card. Here's my Snapchat thing. This is how you can know about what we're doing. We're just going to Snapchat it to me. I was amazed by that. I was like, wait, Snapchat? What's Snapchat? And my son's like, you know how when you're driving and I'm taking videos of you and you tell me to cut it out? Well, that's Snapchat. But that's how they're communicating with one another. And so part of it is like we're running this race, but they're Jesse Owens and I'm, the slowest person on Eastern Middle School's track team because it's just so fast. It's just so fast. And so we have to figure out how do we communicate with them, right? So one is the message. How do you use the words and the kinds of things that are going to keep them engaged and interest them? And then the second is the means. How do you do it? When I came out of school, I went to the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal classified ads, and that's how I found my job. That's not how kids do it anymore. It just isn't. And so we now, as an industry, have to figure this out, right? How do you engage them in a different kind of way? Here's what I know. When you engage them, they are so passionate and interested about it that they will tell all of their friends. So the sell is not as hard as, hey, them thinking, well, it's just going to be so boring and blah, blah, blah. It actually isn't that difficult once you kind of let them see what it is. Then they're very, very interested and incredibly enthusiastic and really raring to go. And probably your biggest challenge is going to be to get this kid to slow down just a tad because we're not there yet. But I would say if that's the issue, you can deal with that. That's better than having some young person who's really bright say, I'm not interested. I'd rather be a $10 an hour video game designer. And I have one of those too at my house. And so I think we have this huge kind of opportunity to do some things that are really unique. Now, as an association, there are a couple things that we've been working on that I would love your help and assistance with, but also that I would love to support you with if I can. So 2 years ago, we ran what we call the Energize series, community conversations about job opportunities in the oil and gas sector. And it was specific to oil and gas because that's where my funding was coming from. But what we did then is we picked 6 cities around the US, Philadelphia, Detroit, Chicago, Bakersfield, Charlotte. So we were all over the place and brought together communities of people to talk about not only the opportunities in this industry, but what are the challenges, right? So it was a listening tour as much as it was us speaking, right? But understanding from people, what are your issues with a particular company if you have one? How can we engage you more? Here's what we're trying to do. Who's in the room and who's not in the room? And how do we then move forward, right? And specifying that it's a conversation. It's not about coming together for 2 hours on one day and coming up with all the answers, problem solving, and we get on with it. Because this is going to be a long haul. But if everybody walks in understanding that it's going to be a long haul, right, and knowing where they fit into kind of this puzzle that we're putting together to resolve an issue or problem, then I think what we've found is that you have a great deal of success and that people will constantly stay connected to you because the messaging is just so critical. So while you may have a lot of young people who may not be thinking about what their job is going to be or this isn't the industry or not really sure, they all have parents. And so quiet as it's kept, that students have guidance counselors and career counselors at college and all these other things, they still really do listen to their parents. They really do listen to their parents. They don't let their parents know that they're listening, but they do. And so sometimes we need to take a multi-pronged approach, right? You're speaking to parents. You're speaking to pastors. You're speaking to Boys and Girls Club folks. You're speaking to the Girl Scouts and the Boy Scouts. But I think it's a message that you need to kind of spread very, very broadly to multiple audiences and lots of different people. Because one, you're going to get nuggets that you never expected that you're going to get. Certainly that's what we experienced. But that's how messages, I think, flow through a community in a very unique kind of way. I had a colleague once who said, everybody has a pastor at their church or in their community who's like the influencer, right? And I would suggest that most local politicians can tell you who is the pastor, who's the influencer in your community. Positive or negative, there's somebody who has a very large megaphone. And so what I would suggest is being proactive. I don't need to come to you when there's bad news. I don't want to react to some issue that's going on. I want to share with you what I think is an opportunity, and then I need you to help me figure out how we get people to engage in this opportunity. Okay, so when you're bringing them as a part of it, I think what you will find is, one, things that you never knew were out there were out there. So here's an example. When we did this program in Detroit, and we had a couple of pre-dinners and lots of meetings with these stakeholders, and one person said, here's the problem that you're gonna have. 20 years ago, maybe Marathon or one of these companies came in here and they said they were gonna do XYZ for their company, and they didn't do it. So now here you come telling me that you're gonna do XYZ, and why should we believe you? Because they didn't do what they said they were gonna do 20 years ago. Well, the truth of the matter is, the people who made that promise no longer probably worked at that company and had left the building. But the people who lived in that community were still there, and they remembered those promises. And so part of building the trust with that community was creating a space where, one, they could tell us that that's the issue, right? Because now that I know that that's really what your issue is, I can figure out if I can find someone who can help you with that issue, and then we can move on to the stuff that I want to talk about. But that requires us to be willing to be open to listening to bad stuff or the things that people may be a little irritated about, even if we think it's ridiculous. And I will tell you, if someone tell me about something that happened 20 years ago, that sounds like, okay, why wouldn't you let it go? But whatever that situation was, left with that community a taste of distrust, not with a company, with an industry, right? I wasn't coming to represent that organization. I didn't work for that company. That company had nothing to do with what I was saying. But what that company did left a mark on that community for 20 years. People being mad and feeling like they had not been responded to. And so I share that to say that as youth group collectively, and the Institute thinks about how you move forward, part of having those kinds of conversations can be of great value to you. Not because you're going to solve the issue, but at least you know it's there. And then you can figure out, okay, how do I bring folks in and ask them? So what do we need to do to move forward? What it is that can I do that can help you? And sometimes it's like, there's nothing you can do. I just want you to know about it. Okay, great. Finally, I would say that I think as an associate, well, first, so that's one of the things that we did and something I would suggest that you do. And I would say, use an organization like mine. Where are my A members? Look at those big, I'm so happy you're all here. Use them, right? Because they live here. This is kind of what we do. We are here to be the resource. We are here to be of assistance. We're going to tell you when there's bad news. We're going to be authentic and truthful because that's what we do. But we're doing it because we're all trying to reach the same goal, which is workforce development and bringing more people into this industry. How we get there may be different, but we all are trying to accomplish the same thing. So the other thing that I want to share, because I think, as we've been talking about minorities, I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that we also need to think about women. And the fact that in this industry, not only the numbers of people of color not representative of what your customer base is, that's not just Mississippi's problem, that's national. So I'm not pointing out something that's going on here. I don't know what's going on here, but what I will tell you is, for example, in the oil and natural gas industry, 8% of that employee base is of color. We're 14% of the economy, but we're 8% of the workers. So that just tells you that something has to happen. Those same numbers exist for women. Very low. And most women who work in this industry work in administrative. They're secretarial, they're clerical, maybe customer service reps. So there's opportunities even for women to move through this industry in some very unique ways. And so we should always just constantly be thinking about what that looks like and that it's going to take time. But the best thing that you can do, I believe, is one, is bring people who have an experience in that job, in that industry, to speak about it. And if you have someone who looks like your audience who can do that, that's great. But if you don't, that's good too. What you really want is someone who can kind of talk about what that work is and why that work is so engaging and exciting. That's what you really want. Because remember, I started out by talking about that when you talk about millennials and and Gen Zs, they're far more diverse, right? So with Gen Xers, the standard was always, if you're talking to a group of African Americans, you bring in an African American. That was the standard. With millennials and Gen Zs, while that would be nice, the truth is that's a group of, those students are far more used to diverse audiences. So they're not going to have the same kind of issue around it, right? But what you do want is someone who's culturally sensitive, right? Someone who's going to be able to speak their language, someone who's going to be able to be impassioned about the work that they do and answer the kinds of questions that they have and hopefully be interested in mentoring and supporting them and all that other stuff. And if they happen to be of color, that's great, but if they don't, that's fine. I think the other things are far more important. And then the last thing I think I would just want to share with all of you is that I truly believe that this idea of workforce is such a huge opportunity for everybody. But that the only way it works is if we all work at it. And that we have lots of different areas that we can work at it. We've got to care about what happens in our schools. We just do. We can't just care about what happens in our businesses and not care about what the outcomes are in our education, our schools. Because the kids in those schools are your future employees. We've got to care about all of this stuff, and we have to know who these students are, not only what they look like, but how they think. And we, as an industry, in many cases, are going to have to change and adjust and adapt some of our own cultural and organizational work styles to be the kind of organizations that they're going to come to, be attracted to, and want to stay in. Thank you.
A few remarks. I want to thank Paula, and particularly I want to thank her for doing something that a lot of you have heard me talk about when I was a governor since, and that we got to quit stigmatizing skills training and the wonderful jobs that are available in the Mississippi economy and the economy all over the country. Hundreds of thousands of jobs go unfilled in the American economy because of people that don't have the skills. High-paying jobs, middle-class jobs, jobs where people have 2 cars and a boat, as we say in Yazoo County. And so I appreciate, Paula, you're making sure people understand there are great jobs out there that we need people to fill, and a lot of them are in the energy industry. So I salute you. Welcome. Glad you're here. Michael, great to be with you. Of course, Michael runs when I was growing up, we called the REAs, the Rural Electric Association. I'm a member of one, Yazoo Valley Electric Power, but being with him reminds me of Katrina. It was my lot in life to be governor during Katrina, and I remember a story about the co-ops, the Rural Electric Power Associations. A couple of days after the storm, President Bush called me and asked me what I thought was a very funny question at the time. He said, "Do you know where Collins is?" I thought, how stupid a question to ask a governor if he knows where a town in his state is. I said, well, sure, I know where Collins is. He tells me there are these 2 pipelines that meet at Collins, and the electricity's off. And these 2 pipelines, the Colonial and the Plantation, are refined product lines that carry enormous amounts of diesel fuel and gasoline to the middle Atlantic states, and they've been down for 2 days, and if they don't get turned back on, we're going to have a fuel shortage. Gasoline and diesel fuel shortage in the middle Atlantic states of the Northeast that will actually affect the economy. Could I try to get them back on? And I said, well, yeah, I'll try. And so as all of you remember, the electricity was off. Cell phones didn't work. House phones didn't work. Most people weren't in the house anyway. The only person I knew whose cell phone worked was Anthony Topazzi, the head of Mississippi Power. Because Southern Company had their own internal cell phone system. Southern, I called Anthony, told him, I said, you think you can get the electricity back on? He said, yeah, let me see. He called me back a few hours later. I wasn't there, as you can imagine. 48 hours after the storm, we were all scrambling around. But he left me a message to the effect that the two stations where they would provide power for the pipelines weren't in Mississippi Power service area. They were in the co-op's service area, but they would get the power back on. And so he called back like the next day. Again, didn't talk to me, just left a message that the power's back on. So I called the president and told him that they got the power back on. I didn't talk to him either. We just, everybody was scrambling. I didn't learn until well later. I thought Mississippi Power got the power back on. I think maybe they did for one of them, but the co-ops got the power back on for another. But it's reminded me, Michael, of how all these companies, Entergy, Haley, and Mississippi Power, and the co-ops all worked together, dropped what they had that had to be done to do something that was an emergency. And it was really remarkable because you don't realize how much electricity means to you till you don't have it. When it's August the 29th, 30th, 31st, like it was then, no air conditioning, let's just say you notice in Mississippi. No air conditioning, no lights, no refrigeration, no freezing capacity. Everybody from south of Mississippi remembers the groceries that were giving away food. Remember that you couldn't get gasoline, not because there wasn't gasoline, but because the pumps didn't work with no electricity to pull the gasoline up out of the tank up under the pumps. And you could go on and on. The cell phones didn't work because the towers didn't have electricity if the towers hadn't been blown down. Some of y'all remember the energy conference we had some years ago when I was governor. We had a professor from Penn State who had adopted a child from India, talking about the difference in life and life's outcomes if you don't have electricity. When we have this energy conference, or the Mississippi Energy Institute meets and works, the importance of energy in our economy, in our society, in our world is something we just take for granted too much, and it's too important, both on the electricity side and oil and gas that goes for motive power, for transportation. I remember when Obamacare, as we call it, was up in front of Congress in 2009 and 10. It was often described, health care is 18% of our economy. We're going to let the government have control of 18% of our economy. And how many times I said, well, energy is 100% of our economy. There is virtually nothing in the American economy that is not affected, driven, allowed to exist by energy. I mean, when you go to the big computer operations in California, the intensity of energy that is used is unbelievable. Go down to Stennis sometime and see the buildings that along the sides are generators lined up just in case the electricity goes off. Energy has always been an incredible part of our economy. From when the British dropped anchor at Jamestown in 1609, and every day since, energy has been an enormous part of the competitive economic advantage of the United States of America. From wood, trees, forests that we burn, to whale oil, water from streams that ran through mills, to to coal for heat, and later boilers to coal that made electricity, and water and dams that made electricity. Then oil and gas, nuclear power, now renewables like wind and solar, all of the above. And I really do believe when we talk about energy, we ought to talk about all of the above, really all of the above. But America has been a place where energy has been an essential element for our economic success. And that's why I believe in abundant, affordable American energy. And that's what I believe the policy of our country ought to be, and I believe it should be the policy of our state. How are we going to have abundant, affordable American energy? We have seen, not only in our lifetimes, but in recent years, an immense change in the cost structure for energy. Often we have seen cost of energy be driven by supply and demand, by market forces. We've had an enormous increase in supply in oil and gas in recent years, primarily driven by the United States. We've increased oil production in the United States by about 4 million barrels a day, where very shortly North America, Mexico, Canada, the United States can be self-sufficient in oil. Those of us who remember the Arab oil embargo 40 years ago, the idea of a North American self-sufficiency would have been a wonderful dream back then. But supply and demand is not the only thing that is having an enormous effect on energy in America. Government regulation and subsidies also are having a big effect. And we should also recognize that technological change is often driving supply and demand. Now, I remember, showing my age, buying gasoline for 30 cents a gallon in the 60s. I remember the flagship industry of my hometown, Mississippi Chemical, which doesn't exist anymore, paying 18 cents a million cubic feet, 1,000 cubic feet for natural gas to make fertilizer in the 1970s. Then Haley, I remember when Grand Gulf came online in the 1980s, and mostly because of delay, skyrocketing interest and litigation, a 60% spike in utility rates when it came online. Yet today, Grand Gulf is the cheapest baseload power, electric power in Mississippi. And natural gas, which 10 years ago was $10 an MCF, is not far behind catching up for the lowest baseload price. The fluctuations of energy prices in our country and in the world, because it is a worldwide commodity, are just simply unbelievable. Natural gas today, well under $2.50 an MCF. Gasoline, less than $2 a gallon at the pump, which I believe is the inflation-adjusted equivalent of that 30 cents a gallon that I was paying when I was a senior at Yazoo High in 1965. Oil, gas, and coal, Mike, are, like other commodities, actually something that go up and down in price. We're not very used to things in the American economy that actually go down in price, but they do, and they go down, and often they go down fast, and they go down far. And we're seeing that right now. Some experts expect oil prices to go down farther. They expect natural gas and coal to continue to fall. They expect some producers to keep production of oil at levels that are historically high. And they also expect Iran to, now that sanctions against them have been lifted, to bring on about 500,000 barrels a day more in oil production. They also recognize the Obama administration is going to drive down the price of coal through regulation and push electric utilities away from coal and toward alternatives like natural gas and other alternatives, all of which will be done by regulation, but will push down the price of coal. Because it's not just supply and demand itself in the market. Government actions can offset supply and demand. Interestingly, though, they don't always affect the price consumers pay. Government actions didn't cause fuel prices to fall in 2014, but they did. Natural gas prices fell considerably in 2014, but according to U.S. government figures, electricity rates rose more that year, 2014, nationwide than any year on record. They rose more than 4% nationally as natural gas and coal prices plummeted. The fuel went down, the electric rates consumers paid went up at a record pace. Why? Government regulations drove up the operational and capital costs for electricity producers. That's one thing I don't want you to leave here without recognizing. Government regulation and subsidies affect the prices consumers pay and can affect those prices tremendously. So while fuel prices have been driven down by increasing supply and relatively lower demand, especially in Asia, gasoline and diesel prices for driving went down greatly, but electricity costs actually went up in the United States. It's interesting to look back and see how all this unfolded, especially the collapse in the price of oil and gas. In 2008, Michael mentioned this, in 2008, candidate Obama said, under my cap and trade plan, electricity rates will necessarily skyrocket. Skyrocket was his term. His first Secretary of Energy said in a speech that year, quote, "What we really need in the United States is to get gasoline prices up to where they are in Europe." Now in Europe, they sell gasoline by the liter, not by the gallon. But measured in gallons, gasoline prices in 2008 in Europe were $8 or $9 a gallon. Well, why would a president want electricity prices to skyrocket, and why would his Secretary of Energy want gasoline to cost $8 or $9 a gallon? So people would use less energy. The energy policy of the administration, they said publicly, was to get people to use less energy. It was environmental policy. It was driven by environmental goals. Under this administration, acreage available for drilling for oil and gas offshore has been reduced. Federal lands onshore leased for oil and gas drilling has been reduced. Energy policy, as I said, was driven by environmental goals, not by energy goals. And this increased production of oil and gas in the United States, the largest increase in production at any time in history in this brief period of time, the government had nothing to do with. It was not because of government regulation. It was not because of government subsidies. In fact, it was in spite of government policy and regulatory activity. It was totally the result of private activity, directional drilling and hydraulic fracturing. Neither received any government support or funding. Prices of oil have collapsed 70% since 2014, and lots of drilling rigs have been stacked. But the United States and world production of oil is still very high, and enormous amounts of oil are in storage. Now, the president likes to take credit for that, but the fact is, American ingenuity created new technology that fixed unbelievable supplies of oil. This oil was found, and now it's in storage. And as I mentioned earlier, soon North America will be self-sufficient in oil. We'll be able to export both, and Congress has allowed for the exportation of oil. And it is accurate to say America is today the Saudi Arabia of coal. We have incredibly abundant energy resources. The question is what we're going to do with them. I think we have to recognize prices are going to fall farther. But the market will find equilibrium and prices will stabilize, probably not in short order. But before long, they will find a level that allows oil and gas to be produced at a profit. Much of it being produced today is being produced at a loss. And that's just a fact. Some of that because countries overseas don't want to lose market share, because they would rather have the income coming in even at a loss than not have the income coming in. Others because companies have made the investment and they want to get some return on the investment even if it is a loss. But you can't keep doing that forever. Middle Eastern states and Russia will ultimately have to balance their production with prices that cover the cost, just like we do, and everybody else ultimately has to as well. We're in a period that has temporarily reduced our comparative advantage, but only temporarily, and let's don't take our eye off the ball. Energy, cheap or expensive, is still necessary to power our economy. And a diversity of fuels is prudent, whether it's for a business or for a government. I think that we have to be careful when the administration takes the position that they want to get rid of coal, as they have plainly stated. The president says he is trying to get rid of coal as an energy source, but he has also said he is against all carbon-based energy. He said this publicly. He wants to have a carbon-free economy and a carbon-free society. I will say to you that oil and gas and coal are going to be mainstays in the United States for at least as long as everybody in this room is alive. Natural gas, a carbon fuel, has been the fuel that has been used by the environmentalists to get rid of coal. They have replaced natural gas with coal. But now they want to get rid of natural gas. I've always been amazed at how the anti-carbon fuel crowd detests nuclear and hydro, two fuels that produce about 25% of all the electricity in the United States today and produce no greenhouse gases. They emit no carbon dioxide at all. And yet, they are not welcome by the environmentalists. More than ever, federal policy is affecting energy costs and therefore decision making. Coal's being driven out of the electricity production market by natural gas, And interestingly, this is at a time when Mississippi Power's plant at Kemper is about to demonstrate that a plant using gasified lignite coal with carbon capture and sequestration will emit no more CO2 than a natural gas-fired power plant. But be prepared for the carbon-free crowd to say, well, natural gas-fired power plants emit too much anyway, so it doesn't make any difference. We have to be, and this is the point I want to make by reciting these facts, we have to be prepared to teach the people in our state and in our country the facts. And the fact is, a carbon-free economy and society is a job-free economy, a low-income economy, a poverty-ridden economy. That for us to have the kind of economy that Mississippians and Americans deserve and are used to, and a society where people have the quality of life that Americans deserve and are accustomed to, we cannot have a carbon-free economy anytime in the foreseeable future. We simply do not have any way to replace the energy that is required to make our economy work. I hope that you will be part of teaching people this. And a very important time is coming to do that. The Environmental Protection Agency has just published what's called the final rule of what is known as the Clean Power Plan. It is a very expensive effort to push states to go under something that, again, Michael talked about earlier, something Congress voted down in 2009. I might add, a Democratic majority in the House and Senate, both houses had Democrat majorities, and voted this down in 2009. And that is what's called a cap-and-trade plan for organizing environmental controls. Hugely expensive. Burden will fall mostly on low-income families because they won't have nearly as many choices. It'll be very difficult for public service commissions and staff's burden. I hope you'll learn about it, and I hope you'll get your neighbors to learn about it, because candidate Barack Obama was right when he said to the San Francisco Chronicle in 2008, the quote I quoted earlier. He said, under my cap and trade plan, electricity rates will necessarily skyrocket. His word, skyrocket. And the Clean Power Plan is designed to push every state electrical system under a cap and trade plan. Energy's complicated. There are so many moving parts, but it is 100% of our economy. There's not anything in this room, there's not anything you do to make a living, including how you go to work or the lights you turn on in your house, that don't ultimately rely on energy. Please protect the reliability and the affordability of the energy for your family, your job, your state, and your country. Thank you very much.